Being a corrections officer is a tough job. I'm sure you already know that, but I guarantee you it's worse than what you've heard. For every story you've heard about guards being spat on, I've got 6 or 7 prisoners trying to bite us. Some even succeeded. The one that succeeded in biting me was HIV positive, which led to a scare that I was infected. I've also helped extract an unruly prisoner more times than I can track. One prisoner threw feces at us. That's what happens when you must force an uncooperative prisoner to come out of their cell. So, we're used to it. Doesn't make me any less desperate for a shower afterwards, though. But we've all had our more horrific stories. What I'm about to tell you is the worst I've ever had. I was working at a maximum security prison at the time. You know the type. It's not quite supermax, like in Florence, Colorado, where so many bombers have lived. It's called Bomber Row. Such people as Timothy McVeigh and the Unabomber were sent there. Maximum security is similar to Supermax. The prisoners are kept under very high levels of security, with their own cells, and only being allowed out of their cell for a certain amount of time a day. The difference is the sheer amount of solitary confinement the inmates get. With Supermax, it's both long-term and intensive, with little to no contact with other humans. Inmates are often there indefinitely, and the administration has ample authority to punish and manage prisoners. There isn't much opportunity for prisoner grievances or outside reviews, and the inmates can forget about having a great deal of opportunities for such things as education and recreation. I find Supermax rather cruel precisely for these reasons. That's not to say that there aren't times for it or people who need to be there, but I've always found it a bit much. That doesn't make maximum security a picnic, though. Maximum security inmates might be in more contact with outsiders, but outside their cells, the inmates are often in restraints and being escorted by guards or locked in a cage for recreation time. The high walls, topped with razor wire and armed guards and observation towers, just reinforces the point. I mastered the art of the resting bitch face very quickly, and made sure there was bite behind my bark. That's the type of prison I was working at. I distinctly remember the day it started. It was a pretty normal day, or as normal as you can get with a maximum security prison. We had to shoot an unruly prisoner with beanbags, which is never a fun activity. It basically means the cell block or recreation yard needs to be on lockdown until the prisoner is subdued and on their way to the prison's Supermax unit, which, by the way, every prison has. It's just called the Hole. I still had a headache after all of it passed, which was halfway ready to turn into a migraine with how much the air stank. At least there was only one more inmate who needed escorting back to his cell. The sound of clanking metal made me and my partner turn our heads. Metal upon concrete always has a distinct sound, and it also has a certain sight, which is why I scrunched my forehead when I didn't see any signs of metal hitting the cement floor. I jerked my head up, and as nobody was left on the yard. "Want to make some music, officer?" he asked, and then he smiled, like he just proudly evicted a suicide widow. My partner and I just rolled our eyes and tightened his restraints. Behavior like that was always expected from that particular prisoner, especially towards women. The only good news is that the occasional dumb prank was the extent of it. It's not like we saw exactly what made the clank either, and then we put him back in his cell where he belonged. The rest of the day was business as usual. One of the prisoners had to go to work in the prison's license plate shops, so we got him escorted down there. Another prisoner had also taken up residence in the block, which meant putting him in his cell. It was only 15 minutes later when the screaming started. Normally, screams don't mean too much in a maximum security prison. After you've been on the job long enough, you learn the different type of screams. The screams that indicate a fight is about to start are the ones that start quiet and then become loud. A distress scream starts out loud and doesn't get any quieter the longer it gets on. A fellow officer and I were in the control room when we heard it, the place in the cell block that can open and close all the doors, see the entire ward, and so on. We needed to report to our immediate supervisor for some details about some new arrivals who'd soon be in the cell block. I looked up from the papers I was given and immediately noticed something about one of the prisoners. At first, I couldn't tell what he was doing. It looked kind of like he was trying out ballet dance. But what kind of self-respecting prisoner in a maximum security prison would do that? Maximum security is only one step below supermax. People go to maximum security prisons because of how violent they are. I nudged my partner and supervisor. We couldn't help but stare. My eyes scrunched when I noticed the arm movements appeared to be picking up momentum. I started walking towards the cell. His arms quickly started flailing around even more. My heart soon started pounding. I didn't even get to move forward 2 steps before the man started screaming. I could have sworn his lungs would have burst with how loud it was. My boss called for backup as we approached the cell. As soon as I looked in the cell, I inhaled sharply. His skin was turning purple. In between screams were becoming strangled. He panted harder and desperately seeking to get some air, and he was squirming and arching his back. Inmate A054551, stop screaming, I ordered, not knowing what else to do. He kept screaming as if he didn't hear me. The fact that his legs started kicking violently only made me jump. My colleagues and I couldn't do much except just look at each other. I grabbed my radio and asked the door to be opened. And then, all at once, he collapsed. We managed to get into the cell, but it was already too late. His heart had already stopped. Our backup finally arrived, and they called medical while we tried reviving him with CPR. Not that it was going to work, with how gray he already was. We gave our statements regarding what happened, and I don't think I need to detail just how shaken the whole bunch of us were. The man was only 5'10", and yet it looked like he was at least a foot off the ground. And yet there was nothing near the cell door that he could have been standing on. Even if there was, he didn't have any rope. We had already did random checks that morning of all the cells, and we also checked the cell after removing the body. There wasn't even a rope in the process of being made. A couple of my coworkers mentioned something. They all thought they saw something red and black, reminding them of an MRI face photo floating around. Nobody could really get a good look since it was in the corner of their eyes. If it was only one incident, chances are the prison might have forgotten about it. But the very next week, another prisoner on my block died in the same manner. It happened again 2 days later. The first two were known troublemakers, but what caught our attention about the third was the guy barely caused trouble for us in the first place. He was also one of those guys that made us all scratch our heads as to why he was even in maximum security in the first place. That was all it took for it to start being a regular occurrence. It quickly became a well-known thing across the prison. Everyone started swapping stories with each other after work. We even started telling our families about it. And I don't doubt for a second that a journalist or two heard. As we came to find out, though, we didn't know everything, as we soon learned when the inmates began talking during recreation time. Maximum security prisoners don't get much interaction with each other, but they still manage to get at least some. Rumors quickly started up, especially on the recreation yard, and we inadvertently heard the prisoners talking. "I finally saw them," one of them said. "The ones with the red skin and only black eyes for features. I saw them." I and my colleagues just looked at each other. What did that even mean? Biologically impossible for humans to have only eyes for facial features. I just had to ask a prisoner as we escorted him back to his cell. "Oh, you mean the red faces." Apparently, they had a name already. The red faces were these beings with red skin that lived in the walls of the prison, and they had purely black eyes and no other facial features. Where there should have been a mouth or a nose, grooves of skin had replaced them. As soon as I heard that, it made sense. To be honest, I'm not entirely sure how seriously everybody took it at first. Some of the prisoners tried telling us that there were red faces behind us. Some of the newbies fell for it, which made the prisoner and veteran officer alike laugh. The jokes about the red faces started spilling over into our hours when we weren't on the job. One day, after pulling into my usual parking spot, I put a red mask with black eye sockets on and snuck up behind my boss. He was pissed. But with my fellow officers watching and laughing their asses off, there wasn't much he could do. He did say one thing, though, that would haunt me. "That's going to get us all in trouble. I hope you know that." In that moment, nobody thought much of it. But then, we all walked into the prison for our shift. We all got our pre-shift briefing. And learned someone died during the night. Someone thought they saw a red face with no nose or mouth that looked like an MRI photo when it happened. One of the night officers insisted he saw the same thing. With violence in the prison lowered during the night, it took everyone by surprise when the screams of distress came from the cell. And then they got to the cell and opened it. The inmate's organs had burst from his abdomen, his small intestines draped over the toilet. Just thinking about that makes my calf muscles clench. Right away, I felt bad about pranking my supervisor. But then, during that single shift, we had 4 people die on us at the hands of the red faces. I was in the control room when 3 of them happened. As for the 4th, I was standing right next to the cell when the attack happened. And I must say, there's nothing quite like being right next to the cell to realize the descriptions of the red faces were true. The fact that I was standing right there and could get a good look inside the cell probably saved that man's life, especially since I could respond immediately. As soon as I saw inside the cell, I inhaled. It wasn't just the face I saw, which really did look like an MRI face photo. The chest looked like an MRI face photo too. And then it made eye contact with me. By the time the cell door fully opened, the thing was gone. None of our supervisors believed us. Not me, not my colleagues, not even my direct supervisor who was watching in the control room. The administration simply didn't believe us. Instead, they threatened to fire us if we ever mentioned the red faces to them again. That didn't stop us from listening to what the inmates had to say about it. Most of the inmates appreciated that. They would put up if their tempers flared. And there was even a slight reduction of how much of a fight they would put up if their tempers flared, which everyone considered an improvement. Not that it made anyone feel better. By then, even a couple of the guards found themselves raised off the ground and choked. They didn't die, but they did quit as soon as they were done giving their statements. Before they left, however, they had given us a warning. Apparently, the red faces were changing. Beforehand, their contours were round, like we were used to. But that wasn't what they saw. The contours were becoming sharper and more angular. Then came the moment that changed everything. Yet another inmate had been attacked by a red face. We managed to restart his heart, and he regained consciousness just in time for the prison superintendent to arrive with the EMTs. As soon as the superintendent arrived, his eyes bulged. He took a step or two back and even started swaying. I think someone had to help him stay steady on his feet. That didn't keep him from shaking, and shaking hard. Even his breathing started to get shaky. It didn't even make sense. This was the same man who shouted like he was R. Lee Ernie's alter ego. Every time he had to deal with prisoners on a regular basis, he yelled at them. His favorite insult being, "Go fart a rainbow, you plumpy platypus." He yelled that whether you were fat or skinny. We tried explaining what we saw, but he shot us all down and told us to shut up. And then the inmate was taken to the hospital. The next day, right before the shift started, we all learned that the inmate had died during the night at the hospital. The prison superintendent got up on the podium. It was so silent, I could hear someone in the back of the room scratching their arm. And then the superintendent spoke. "I've heard the reports people have been giving about the red-skinned faces with only eyes on their faces. I am tired of this nonsense. You are correction officers, not hillbillies. From now on, any reports of these beings will result in the officers involved being terminated. Any inmates who report instances of them are to be regarded as a danger to self and others. If you fail to do so, you will be terminated. And you will also be terminated if you discuss these beings with the inmates or each other." That day, 6 officers on my block alone were fired because they mentioned the red faces in passing. 2 of the inmates on my block got sent to the hole for the same reason. We couldn't even look the inmates in the eyes anymore. Almost immediately, the mood changed. The level of resistance from the inmates spiked, and it stayed there. Many took to mutilating themselves to escape, but once they were released from the medical unit or the hospital, they simply found themselves in the hole instead of being transferred to another prison like they wanted to. The only ones who succeeded in escaping the red faces were the ones who committed suicide. Every time that happened, we seemed to hear what sounded like a cow laughing, which only made me wonder if suicide was much of an improvement. After the superintendent's announcement, more prisoners were being killed, as many as 2 a day. We noticed that we were all becoming more and more short of breath, and it was obvious why. More people were being fired than they were being hired at that point. 2 months after the superintendent made that announcement, we started finding the shanks. Prison talk for handmade knives. Inmates started attacking officers, leading to privileges being taken from them and being moved to the hole. The attacks lasted for months, on top of the red-face killings, the inmates. I was lucky. I was only attacked twice with those things. I don't consider that a solstice, but both incidents required stitches. The prisoner who attacked me was perhaps one who resisted more than the others, which is probably what caused him to be transferred to an actual supermax prison. That caused more people to start attacking us, but of all the prisoners, he was the only one who succeeded. At that, the prisoners seemed to have a permanent scowl on their faces. I don't think anyone on the floor dealing with the inmates every day doubted that something was coming. And then it happened. I was halfway through my shift when 4 inmates found themselves under attack. With so many officers gone, nobody seemed to have much of a chance to stop before the next attack happened. In fact, when one attack was still underway, another one started, forcing a couple of officers to investigate while the rest of us handled the first one. We had to break protocol. There wasn't an officer in the control room. And of course, the inmates noticed that. One of the attacked inmates managed to reach the control room and managed to open the doors to the other cells. I was busy with another inmate, so I don't know exactly what happened. My eyes bulged immediately when the inmates suddenly surged forward. It was almost like I was in the middle of the running of the bulls, with the bulls quickly charging at me. I couldn't move. I didn't even know where I was supposed to look or who to look at. For that matter, I couldn't even control how much my eyes were blinking. All of a sudden, a sledgehammer feeling rocketed through my back. The taste of iron swirled around in my mouth, my lower jaw shooting arrows of pain through my face. My breaths were sawing in and out. I don't know if I groaned or not, but I do know I was squirming. Despite the pain pinching my entire body, I still managed to look up. I only got a few glimpses, but I still managed to notice a couple of my colleagues falling to the ground. Some of the inmates started kicking them. One of them stomped on one officer's head in one swift drop kick. The foot might as well have been an axe. The bone might as well have been a tree trunk whose last stand finally gave out. My breathing started to hurt as soon as I saw that. And then there were footsteps. or more like pounding. The floor shook so hard, I almost thought the prison was collapsing on top of me. Stomach acid lurched into my mouth and onto the floor as the doors slammed and the metal tore. Then, I heard something. I haven't heard anything quite like it before, or since. At first, it reminded me of an entire herd of cows mooing, but it soon mixed with a didgeridoo from an Australian Aborigine culture. All at once, I saw them. Giant, spindly legs reminding me of the sewing spindle from Sleeping Beauty, only much more longer. I didn't understand how they could function like that. They were much too thin to support any sort of weight, and yet they pounded harder and faster than any industrial printer could shoot out what you told it to print. But more than that, they were black with red stripes going up the sides. At that point, I was so dizzy, I forgot I was on the ground. I shook my head in an effort to get my bearings, but it wouldn't go away. The only thing I succeeded in doing was making myself so nauseous, I threw up right where I was. One of the faces paused and loomed over me. Then before I could do anything about it, everything went black. I don't know how long I was laying on the floor, passed out for. For all I know, it could have been 3 minutes or 3 hours. When I came to, I thought I heard the bang of some sort of projectile being fired. I even thought I heard the sound of a beanbag hitting skin. It doesn't matter. I still coughed from the tear gas lingering in the air. Standing up after that was a difficult task, as I might as well have been moving in molasses. My hips and lower legs hurt. My wrist looked broken too, but I still managed to stand. I'm not entirely sure how though. My limbs were so heavy and my muscles so tight. My abdomen cramped up at one point, and a starburst or two went off in my eyes. The copper taste in my mouth still lingered. Then I looked around. I don't know why I did, and sharply inhaled. To this day, I don't know how I didn't throw up right then and there. The first thing I saw was a hand laying at my feet. A severed hand from the wrist, the tendons, bone, and ligaments reminding me of spaghetti. I kept looking around. Organs and body parts were hanging off the stairs, and the furniture inside the cells, even off the hinges of the cell doors. Some of the organs decorating the place were human intestines. The blood redder than the nose of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. It didn't help that the chunks of brain matter and bone chips littered the floor. A white substance that I later came to learn was human nerve smeared the place. Slices of human liver lay on a couple of the surfaces like paperweights. And the blood might as well have been turned into paint. And even then, it was silent. The only things to be heard were my breathing, my footsteps stepping in blood, and the occasional drip onto the floor. I almost collapsed when I saw a team of officers in the windows of the control room. Maybe they were too shocked to have me being alive and standing register right away, or maybe they only just arrived. But it didn't matter. As soon as I almost collapsed, they jumped to my aid, as if they were statues and me collapsing was the only way to make them capable of moving again. "What's your name?" one of them asked. Janet Fitzroy. I managed to get out, though my voice sounded like I had spoken underwater. I wasn't the only survivor that day, but there wasn't many of us. I couldn't even bring myself to care that the inmates killed the prison superintendent, much less that he had been decapitated. His spinal cord ripped clean out of his spine and draped over his desk lamp like a Christmas garland. It did get to me, though, that my supervisor was dead. It wasn't just that. It was also how they found him. His nose was sliced clean off, and his mouth had been sewn shut. I still don't know how the information managed to register. Between the pain I was in and my numb mind, the lights made my eyes burn. For days afterwards, I remained dazed. Investigators interviewed me, though I'm not sure they believed all of what I said. When the media got wind of the red faces, not even turning off the news could stop them. I had to file a restraining order just to get some peace and quiet. That didn't stop me from learning one more detail, though. Dozens of inmates and officers were dead and had their organs removed, but only a certain portion of them were found like my dead supervisor. Their mouths sewn shut and their noses gone. But beyond that, they also had their eyeballs ripped out, leaving nothing but empty eye sockets. The governor personally visited me and the other surviving officers. She hugged me, I remember, and gave her condolences over what happened. We all received leave with full pay. I never did set foot in that prison again. In time, nobody would be able to visit it without also committing trespassing. The governor announced that once the investigation was complete and the scene processed, the prison would be permanently decommissioned. Many of the surviving prisoners were relocated to other prisons. Most of the surviving correction officers, myself included, found work at other prisons after our doctors gave us a clean bill of health. Not all of us lived long enough to regain our health, though. I attended 2 funerals for 2 of my former colleagues who died of self-inflicted gunshot wounds to the head. Like I said at the beginning, being a correctional officer is one tough job. Ask any one of us. There are things we don't like repeating to others, and that's one story I really don't like repeating. So why am I? The answer is simple. Last week, I got a phone call from someone who worked with an old coworker of mine. Any annoyance I had at dinner being interrupted vanished when I answered the phone. "Is this Janet Fitzroy?" the voice on the other end of the line asked, clearly shaking. As soon as I heard the shaking voice, my stomach felt like it turned to lead. "My name is Lucas. Lucas Somerset. I work at the prison near Albany. I heard you worked at the prison where the massacre happened." That immediately made me go still. I already knew what he was going to say. Those things the media described. Those red faces. I didn't think that they were real until we saw them. 4 of our inmates have been found strangled to death. They've all been found with their noses severed and their mouths sewn shut. Thank you for watching. I always appreciate the support you show me, and I'm forever grateful for it. Hope everyone had a wonderful day. All my social media information is in the description box below. All the story, music, and image information is below as well. And don't forget, I'll see you.